Senate Bill 491. The clerk will read.
House Committee substitute for Senate Bill 491, a bill to be entitled an act to extend the sunset on the law establishing the North Carolina Sustainable Local Food Advisory Council. General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Representative Dixon is recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, this bill extends the sunset on the law establishing the North Carolina Sustainable Local Food Advisory Council until July the 31st, 2015. There is only one substantive change from the original bill, and that is on page 3, line 21, where under the duties, the duty number 8 is stricken from the bill that we're presenting here. A brief explanation. On February the 2nd, 2010, this Local Food Advisory Council met for the first time. Commissioner Troxler was nominated and unanimously elected as chair, and has been since then. This is an advisory council. From the Agriculture Regulations Committee, a bill came forward that would change the name of this advisory council. When this bill was presented in the Agriculture Committee, quite a bit of conversation took place. The senior chair of the Ag Committee pulled this bill from the committee, which I think was a wise move. So having confidence and respect in the senior chair of the Ag Committee, and having confidence and respect in the Commissioner of Agriculture, I solicit your support for this bill as it's presented. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Franklin, Representative Bradley, rise?
Speak on the bill.
The gentleman has the floor to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is not about a word. It is about a practice of deception that governments have used for years, decades even. This comes on the heels of a long train of abuses where governments have twisted the meanings of words by subtle deception and redefinition until the terms themselves come to mean the opposite of the message they communicate to the public. Take, for example, the Patriot Act. If I oppose the Patriot Act, does that make me a terrorist rather than a patriot? That is the very argument that many of my colleagues on my side of the aisle would support, but that I overwhelmingly reject. I would assert that the terrorists are those who support the Patriot Act, and the patriots are them that oppose it. By government fiat, words have been redefined until they lose all meaning and come to mean the exact opposite of what they say. Those who would seek to ridicule or falsely paint opponents of sustainability by government fiat and redefinition as people who want to kill off and burn down the planet Earth have placed themselves into...
House will come to order so that Representative Bradley's comments can be heard.
Have placed themselves into the same camp as those who use the name Patriot Act to label patriotic Americans as terrorists for opposing it, and history will not be as forgiving as I am. I do not oppose sustainability according to its dictionary definition, and neither does any single member in this body or anybody around the entire planet Earth. Sustainability, being a good idea, needs to be adopted in the same way that contour farming was adopted thousands of years ago voluntarily because it's a good idea. When you force adoption of any concept by government force, fiat, or imprimatur, you have allowed for the subtle redefinition of words to create a tyranny. In this case, the word sustainability, as it's being used here, is defined in General Statute Section 106-830B1 according to the trilateral definition of ecology, economy, and equity first conceived in Rio de Janeiro Declaration of 1992, promulgated by the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives and encoded into the EPA by presidential executive order bypassing the proper constitutional process of Senate ratification. It is my goal that the Local Food Advisory Council be able to continue to study this and other issues, and that it become even more inclusive of traditional farmers than it has been in the past. We seek inclusivity rather than exclusivity, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would like to be recognized to send forth an amendment.
Do members have copies of the amendment by Representative Bradley? Clerk will read.
Representative Bradley moves to amend the bill on page 1, line 3 by rewriting the line to read.
Amendments properly before us. Representative Bradley, you have the floor to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is not designed to change what the Local Food Advisory Council will study, but to change the practice of forcing the redefinition of terms by government fiat. It even retains the given statutory definition of sustainability intact and makes that one of the several duties of the Council to study. This amendment is not designed to prevent the Local Food Advisory Council from studying this or any other issue, but, ladies and gentlemen, we have to stop the practice of government deceitfully using redefined terms such as patriot, that actually means repealing the Fourth Amendment, and sustainable as a code word for social justice in order to lull the public into complacency through overt deception. We were elected to represent our constituencies, not to deceive them. We were elected to uphold and defend the constitutions of the United States and the state of North Carolina, not to abrogate them. This amendment simply does two things. First, it makes the Local Food Advisory Council more inclusive by opening 2 spots on the council to traditional agriculture. And second, it removes the redefinition of sustainability into one of the council's duties. But even more importantly than these 2 simple practical effects, the amendment will restore compliance with the U.S. Constitution, to which we have all sworn an oath to uphold and defend, by refusing the implementation of international treaties through executive order that have never been ratified by the U.S. Senate. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I ask for your support on the amendment.
Representative Dixon is recognized to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, with all due respect to my colleague who brings up some very excellent points, I would just say this that I said in the Ag Committee. To change is easy. To improve is more difficult. I think that the proper way to do this is to pass the bill as presented and continue to have confidence in Commissioner Troxler and those who are on this advisory council. And so I would respectfully encourage you to vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Members, we have 4 lights on. If you do not wish to speak on the amendment, please turn your lights off at this time. Representative Pittman is recognized to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In discussing this bill and where it originally had this language taken out, a statement was made that it's not that big a deal, so why bother with it? But it is a big deal to a lot of us who see the efforts of the United Nations to circumvent our Constitution and have the government more and more in control of people. And that's what their definition of sustainability is about. It's not about maintaining a resource and all. It's about getting the people under control of the government. And that is a big deal to a lot of us. So I simply say to those of you who may not understand that, if it's not a big deal, why not let us take that word out? Because it is a big deal to us who see the threat of the United Nations against American sovereignty and freedom. Thank you. Please vote for the amendment.
Representative Brawley from Mecklenburg is recognized to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Bradley yield for a question?
Does Representative Bradley yield for a question?
I do.
He yields.
Thank you, Representative. Notice that on page 2, in lines 16 through 19, you're making 2 changes where you are removing the phrase conventional food producers and completely lining out sustainable food producers. And I would request that the gentleman explain the difference between a conventional food producer and a sustainable food producer.
Thank you for that question. If we were actually going by the dictionary definition of sustainable, there would be no difference between a conventional food producer and a sustainable food producer, which is what we're trying to get to. However, in the organization's charter, as it currently is, sustainability is a term that was designated in Rio de Janeiro by the United Nations in 1992 that means social justice more than it means actual sustainability.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, would you call the chamber to order, please?
House will come to order. Representative Bradley. Brawley has.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the gentleman would yield for a second question.
The gentleman yield.
I will.
He yields.
On page 3, line 17, you've marked out a representative of the North Carolina Farm Transition Network Incorporated and replacing that with a representative of the Conservation Trust of North Carolina. I'm not familiar with the North Carolina Farm Transition Network. Could you tell me something about that organization and why you found them not deserving of being in the bill?
Again, thank you for that question. The reason that change was made is because the North Carolina Farm Transition Network Incorporated no longer exists. And we were taking the spot from an organization that no longer exists and is currently unable to put a member on the committee and giving it to the Conservation Trust of North Carolina, which does currently exist.
Thank you. Would the gentleman yield for a third question?
Does the gentleman yield?
I will.
He yields.
Thank you, Representative. You have also marked out on several occasions the word sustainable and replaced it with local. Would you tell me what the difference between those two concepts is?
In fact, the word was not replaced with local. Local was already there. What we did was we removed the concept of the sustainability as defined earlier in the section from the fundamental premise of the organization itself and made it one of its 9 duties so that it has more freedom to pick out the good parts and reject the bad parts, which it did not have before when the UN defined sustainability was a fundamental premise of its existence.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does Representative Dollar from Waycross?
To see if Representative Bradley would yield for a question.
Does Representative Bradley yield?
I will.
He yields.
Representative Bradley, have you had a chance to discuss this amendment with the Commissioner of Agriculture? And if you have, could you tell us what position the Commissioner of Agriculture has on this amendment?
I have not had the opportunity to speak with Commissioner Troxler on the removal of the sustainability language.
Follow-up. Does the gentleman yield for a follow-up question?
I will.
He yields.
And therefore, you're not aware of his position on your amendment, yea or nay?
That is correct.
Mr. Speaker, to ask Representative Dixon a question, if he would yield.
Before we go to Representative Dixon, if this amendment does pass, it will change the title of the bill, so we will not have third reading today. Does Representative Dixon yield?
Yes. Representative Dixon, you heard the question I had. Do you have firsthand knowledge of what the position of the Commissioner of Agriculture is with respect to this amendment?
In talking with the representatives of the Commissioner of Agriculture, they're fine with the bill as I have presented it.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment. For what purpose, the gentleman from Franklin, Representative Bradley, rise.
Speak a second time on the bill, on the amendment.
The gentleman has the floor to speak a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the bottom line here is that the Local Food Advisory Council is extremely exclusive. Of its 27 members, only 2 are from traditional agriculture. That should be inconceivable to us, and we absolutely have an obligation to correct it. This amendment does that. Not only does this amendment correctly reorient food policy towards actual food producers, but it also ensures that the Council can continue to carry out its duties in a constitutional manner, which we have a duty and an obligation to uphold, having sworn an oath to uphold and defend it. This amendment does not prevent the local Food Advisory Council from considering matters pertaining to sustainability according to the given definition. Indeed, it requires such under item 9 of the council's duties. It simply reorients the council into compliance with the Constitution and allows the council to do exactly as I said above and adopt those parts of sustainability which are a good idea and reject those parts that are not, a latitude which in its current incarnation this council does not have. This amendment will allow the council to continue operation in a manner consistent with the U.S. Constitution while allowing the council to continue to consider measures relating to sustainability and to pick and choose between those measures which will strengthen North Carolina agriculture and reject those measures which will weaken it. This amendment is about inclusivity, and I commend the amendment for your support.
Further discussion, further debate on the amendment? If not, the question before the House is the amendment A1 offered by Representative Bradley on House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 491. All those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. All those opposed to the amendment will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock the machine, record the vote. 51 have been voted in favor, 63 against. The amendment fails. We're back on further discussion, further debate. Excuse me. For what purpose, the gentleman from Madison, Representative Ratbrise.
Speak very briefly on the bill.
The gentleman has the floor to speak on the bill on second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to call members' attention to the fact that the creation of this local food policy council took about a 6-month period, a little over 2 years ago. It started out as a 19-member commission, expanded to the current number that you see there, 27, and it was done because all of the farm interests were brought in. They got an opportunity to weigh in on this, and as a result of that, the commission was expanded to the number of 27 so that we made sure all interests were represented. The Commissioner of Agriculture was pleased with the changes that were made. He endorsed it, and I would hope that you would support this measure tonight. Thank you.
Further discussion, further debate. For what purpose, the gentleman from Franklin, Representative Bradley, rise.
Speak a second time on the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2 days, starting on June 20th, 2012, the 20-year anniversary of Earth Summit 2012 will meet again in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with one of its stated goals being to convert the redefinition and choice editing implied in the social justice component of sustainability from a cooperative treaty into hard international law. If you don't believe me, the United Nations is hosting a website currently that lays it all out at earthsummit2012.org. Don't take my word for it. Look it up yourselves. It is a blatant violation of the U.S. Constitution to become involved in an international treaty leading to hard international law, except that that treaty be ratified by the U.S. Senate. Here it is right here in Article 1, Section 10, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, and Article 2, Section 2, duties of the President. He shall have the power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided that 2/3 of the senators present concur. As you see, it is blatantly unconstitutional for the state of North Carolina to become a party to international treaties that have not been adopted by the United States, and the United States can only enter such treaties provided that 2/3 of the Senate present concurs. Our duty has seldom been more clear than this. If we cannot fix this council to become constitutional, then we have the constitutional obligation under Article 6 Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution to reject it. And I would ask that my colleagues fulfill the obligation of our oath of office by voting no on this bill. Thank you.
Further discussion, further debate. For what purpose, the gentleman from Nash, Representative Collins, rise.
Speak briefly on the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
I don't know if any of you are like me or not, but I read the bill, and 14 times I read this phrase, sustainable food, and I had no idea how we define it in North Carolina. So I decided to look up the general statutes from which this comes, and I found the definition in chapter 106-830. It says, definition. I like to know what I'm voting on before I vote, frankly. It says, definitions. As used in this article, the following definitions apply. Sustainable food. If you want to know what that means, here's what it means. An integrated system of plant and animal production practices that have a site-specific application and that over the long term are able to do all of the following.
A, satisfy human food and fiber needs. B, enhance environmental quality and the natural resource base upon which the agriculture economy depends. C, sustain the economic viability of farm operations. And D, enhance the quality of life for farmers and the society as a whole. I'm not going to try to tell you how to vote on this one. If you like that definition, vote for it. If you don't, vote against it.
Further discussion, further debate. If not, the question for the House is the passage of House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 491 on second reading. All those in favor will vote aye. All those opposed will vote no. Clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock the machine, record the vote. 82 having voted in favor, 32 against. House Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 491 is passed the second reading without objection. Will be read a third time.
General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Further discussion, further debate. If not, the question for the House is the passage of House Committee Substitute on Senate Bill 491 on its third reading. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed will say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. House Committee Substitute has passed its third reading for Senate Bill 491 will be returned to the Senate by special message.